Scaling laws are one of the most quietly powerful ideas in modern AI. Spend more compute, and the loss falls along a smooth, predictable curve. They decide how labs spend hundreds of millions of dollars, and a research interviewer wants to know not just what they predict, but where they quietly lie. So let's start with what a scaling law is actually describing. Scaling laws get cited constantly. Strip away the hype. What does a scaling law actually describe, and why is it useful? Take about 10 seconds to think.
Empirically, as you scale up model size, training data, and compute together, the pre-training loss falls in a remarkably smooth, predictable way. A power law, which is a straight line on a log-log plot. So a scaling law is the observation that bigger and more isn't a wide guess. The loss at a larger scale is predictable from a series of smaller runs. That's enormously useful. It lets you forecast what a giant, expensive run will achieve before you pay for it, and decide how to spend a compute budget. The crucial caveat to hold from the very start is what it predicts. Pre-training loss, the average next token prediction error. That's a proxy, and it's smooth. The thing you actually care about?
Say you've got a fixed compute budget. How do you choose model size versus how much data? What does compute optimal actually mean? Take a moment before you answer.
Compute is roughly model parameters times training tokens. So for a fixed budget, you're choosing how to split it. The naive instinct is to make the model as big as possible, but that's wrong. A huge model trained on too little data is undertrained, and a tiny model on oceans of data wastes capacity. The compute optimal answer from the Chinchilla work is to scale parameters and tokens together, roughly in proportion, on the order of 20 tokens per parameter. The headline finding was that many earlier models were too big and badly undertrained for their compute. So compute optimal is about balance. Grow the model and the dataset in step, instead of pouring everything into size.
Here's a distinction people miss. Why is the compute optimal model usually not the model you'd actually choose to deploy? Take 10 seconds here.
Because compute optimal only minimizes training loss for a given training budget. It completely ignores what the model costs to run. If you're going to serve a model to millions of users, inference is the dominant lifetime cost, and you'd happily spend more on training to get a cheaper model. So you deliberately go past the compute optimal point. Train a smaller model on far more data than Chinchilla would suggest. It's a little worse per unit of training compute, but it's smaller and cheaper forever at inference. That's why production models are often intentionally overtrained relative to the compute optimal recipe. Scaling laws inform the decision, but the right size depends on how much you'll serve it, not just the training budget.
Now the trap. A team wants to take results from one tiny pilot run and extrapolate them to a giant run. What would you caution? Take a moment to weigh it.
I'd caution that a power law holds over a range, and extrapolating many orders of magnitude from one tiny run is exactly where it bites. A few specific risks. The fit can bend. As you scale, you may hit data limits, run out of unique high-quality tokens and start repeating, or change architecture, and the clean line breaks. The law predicts loss, not the capability they probably care about, and downstream ability doesn't scale as smoothly. And a single small point tells you almost nothing about the slope. So the discipline is to fit across several scales spanning a real range, not one pilot. Hold out a larger run to check the prediction before committing. And budget for the data, not just the compute. Treat the extrapolation as a hypothesis to test, not a guarantee.
Push on that proxy point. Suppose loss keeps falling right on the curve. Why might the capability you actually care about still not improve as predicted? Take 10 seconds to think it through.
Loss is an average over next token prediction, but the capability you care about, multi-step reasoning or a specific benchmark, is a derived, often thresholded metric, and those can move in jumps rather than smoothly. That's the whole emergence debate, part real, part an artifact of how the metric is scored. There's also a distribution gap. Lower loss on the pre-training mix doesn't guarantee gains on your domain or your eval. And for many capabilities, post-training matters more than the last bit of pre-training loss. So I wouldn't assume loss improvements convert linearly into the thing I want. I track the downstream metric directly on the distribution I actually serve, and treat the loss curve as necessary evidence, but not sufficient.
So, the through line. Scaling laws say pre-training loss falls as a smooth power law in compute, and they tell you to grow model and data together rather than just inflating size. But compute optimal isn't deployment optimal. If you serve it a lot, train smaller and longer. And the law predicts loss, not capability, and not forever. Fit across many scales, watch the downstream metric, and distrust a single tiny pilot. It's a map, not the territory. If this kind of crib helps, like this episode, share it with someone who's interviewing, and subscribe to Interview on your way. More and better questions are on the way.